joining us tonight. My name is Chelsea Rosebrook, and I'm the Vice President of the Portland chapter of the Native Plant Society of Oregon. NPSO promotes the enjoyment, study, and protection of Oregon's native plants. And as part of our mission, we present a speaker each month on timely topics of interest to our members. Our speaker tonight is Kieran Hanrahan, presenting Finding New Botanical Wonders with Digital Tools. First, let's review some Zoom etiquette. Your audio and video should be off during the program, and if you have any questions during the program, feel free to click on the chat button and enter in your questions there. Our presenter, I think Kieran, is going to answer questions throughout the presentation, but any leftover questions that don't get answered, we'll answer at the end. You'll also notice that there's closed caption features, which you can click on to enable. We welcome you to stay after for any follow-up questions, as well as some time. We'll open up the conversation for tonight's program and any upcoming events and activities of interest, and hope that you can join us for that after. If you're looking to get more involved in the Portland chapter, we're also currently seeking a publicity chair and a president starting in January. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to the NPSO email or myself, and we can have a conversation. Some other exciting announcements are that some of our programs, our monthly programs like this one, are going to be in person. Next month is our first one, so keep your eye out for that if you're interested in doing something that's in person. Not all of them will be in the future, but we are moving towards some of them being in person. So now I'll introduce our speaker tonight. Kieran Hanrahan is an avid amateur botanist who lives in Southeast Portland. He's been hiking in the Pacific Northwest since he moved here from Maine almost 15 years ago. Kieran became seriously interested in the botany of the region in 2021 after his interactions on iNaturalist sparked his love of the Oregon white oak and its habitat. Since then, he branched out beyond oaks and learned about many other plants and ecosystems in Oregon and Washington. Kieran is also a former board member of the Portland chapter. He served as communication chair and field trip chair, and you can find him on iNaturalist at Kieran DH. Welcome, Kieran.
Great. Thanks, Chelsea. Appreciate the introduction. I'll take things from here. Okay. So in tonight's presentation, we're going to talk through tools and methods that you can use to plan botanizing trips to places that aren't written about in guidebooks or mapped on hiking apps. I've tried to tailor the presentation so that people who are brand new to this come away with the knowledge they need to start, and people who have some experience doing this still get to learn something new. And like Chelsea said, I will be taking questions throughout the presentation. So if you have a question, feel free to pop it in the chat. I'll try to answer them as the flow of the presentation allows. So if I'm not answering your question right away, don't be offended. I might answer it at the end of a section, or I might wait until the end of the presentation to get to it, just to keep things moving. So a little bit more about me. Like Chelsea said, I'm an amateur botanist. I grew up spending a lot of time in the woods in Maine surrounded by plants. But like many of us, my relationship with the natural world grew more distant over time as I got older, until I became seriously interested in botany in 2021. I'm also a hiker. I've done a lot of hiking and some backpacking in Oregon and Washington since I moved to Portland in 2011. And I'm a curator on iNaturalist, which is sort of like a moderator for taxonomy and for the community. If you're not already familiar with it, iNaturalist is a community science platform that we'll talk more about later on. And last, and perhaps most importantly for this presentation, I spend a lot of time looking at maps and using other digital tools to plan my botanizing trips. My idea for this presentation came from talking to other members of the chapter and realizing that those are skills that a lot of other amateur botanists don't have yet. And I thought it would be fun to share the approach that I use to find new places to go. So I've kind of broken this down into 4 sections. I'm going to cover these in a linear order, but they don't always happen in this order. Just as an example, you might prefer to find somewhere interesting first and go out there without a target species in mind, and then figure out what it is you see later on. But this is the process that I often follow, and it's also one that makes for a good narrative for a presentation tonight. So to start, we'll talk about learning a target plant. You might think, I showed up to a Native Plant Society of Oregon presentation. Of course, I know how to learn about plants. And I certainly have felt the same way, but there have also been times where I've been out in the field looking for a plant and then realized I had a much less information about my target than I realized I did, and felt a little lost. And those moments are always a little frustrating and a little embarrassing to realize you haven't done as much work as you might have liked to prepare. And so I'm going to spend some time starting talking about plants for that reason. So in this section, we'll cover why you might pick a plant to look for, learning how to look for your plant in the field, learning how to tell the plant apart from others, and then understanding your plant's phenology. So what to expect to see from your plant when you go. So one of my favorite steps of this entire process is picking something I find interesting. These are just a handful of reasons that I pick a plant. I might pick a plant. I like plants because they look cool, they're rare, they might be useful for some reason. They might have like an interesting disjunct population, a cool biogeographical story where the next nearest population of the species is hundreds of miles away. There could be evolutionary weirdos or any number of other reasons. As far as learning what to look for, what's most important is to form a mental search image of your target. And I also highly recommend backing up that mental image with actual photos and a species description that you bring with you, so that if your memory gets fuzzy, you have a backup. You don't want to get lost without a species description and photos just because you don't have cell phone service in the field. I've lost track of the number of times that I haven't saved those details to my phone or had a hard copy with me on paper. And then I've tried to load, Oregon Flora or some other app on my phone with 1 bar of cell service. So some of the things to look out for are understanding the different characteristics of the plant, like the leaves, flowers, fruit, seeds, stems, habit, which refers to, how the plant grows. Is it upright? Is it a tree, a shrub, a vine? And then the size. And size might seem kind of odd at first, but especially when you're looking for smaller plants, you want to have a clear idea of just how small the plant is so that you're not looking for things that are much larger than your actual target. For phenology, you want to understand when your plant leaves out, buds, flowers, fruits, and senesces. So what time of year, depending on the area you're going to. And this will make sure that you're looking for the right plant characters. Some plants are pretty nondescript when they're not flowering, for example. So you want to make sure that you can find the plant even if it's not in the life stage you expected it to be. Habitat, of course, is very important for knowing where to go in the first place. So things like elevation, the light needs of the plant, whether it grows in shady forest floors or open exposed meadows, the soil types and moisture. So does it grow in running streams or in fens or dry rocky outcrops? And then aspect. Aspect refers to like the angle of a slope relative to cardinal direction. So like a north-facing slope would have a northern aspect. That's not always relevant, but it can be relevant for plants in some cases, and is worth mentioning here. Associated species are also really important for narrowing down, making sure you're looking in the right place when you're out in the field, so that if you see one of the species associated with your target, you kind of know you're in the general area. And then look-alike species and how to tell them apart. It's important for obvious reasons. So there are a lot of online sources for species descriptions and photos that you can use to learn the characteristics of your plant. So Oregon Flora is one of my favorites, in large part because I live in Oregon. But there are a number of other sources if you live elsewhere in the region or elsewhere in the world. Uh, Oregon Flora also has uh, printed books, The Flora of Oregon. They have volumes 1 and 2 out and are working on volume 3 now. But all the species descriptions that are in Flora of Oregon are available online on their website, oregonflora.org. The Berkerbarium at UW, similarly focusing on Washington, is a useful tool for the same reasons Oregon Flora is. And they are the publishers of Flora of the Pacific Northwest, which you may know as Hitchcock or Hitchcock and Cronquist. That's a big beefy green book that covers the regional flora of the Pacific Northwest. Jepson eFlora is useful for taxa that are also present in California. FloraNorthAmerica.org is the online version of the Flora of North America, which is a continent-wide flora. And pnwflowers.com is a website by the local photographer Mark Turner, who also has a companion book, Wildflowers of the Pacific Northwest, and then not listed here is Trees and Shrubs of the Pacific Northwest. And I really like Mark's website and books because he and his co-author group things by flower color and then by flower morphology, so number of petals. And as a beginner, that was a really helpful way to learn my plants. You know, I could see a plant out in the field. I didn't know a lot of the vocabulary. I didn't know my plant families, but I could take a picture and I knew it had a red flower with 5 petals, and I could kind of narrow it down a lot from there. As far as apps go, my favorite app and the only plant specific app I'll kind of recommend in this presentation is the Oregon Wildflower Search app, which I know is available on iPhone. I believe it's also available on Android. It's free. My favorite thing about it is that it's available offline. So you download it once, and then when you're out in the field, you can use it even if you don't have cell service. And then this is not a digital tool, but one that I'll reference later on in this presentation. And so mentioned here is Plants of the Pacific Northwest Coast by Pojar and McKinnon, which is a great book. It has a lot of great ethnobotanical information in particular that other sources lack. So wanted to make sure I included that recommendation here. So for distinguishing lookalikes, this isn't always relevant if the plant doesn't have lookalikes in the region where you're going. But many species do share a range with lookalikes. And for those that do, you want to make sure you understand important morphological details. So things like whether the leaves of your plant are opposite or alternate, simple or compound, what the margins or the edges of your leaves look like. So you can see this example of this page from Plants of the Pacific Northwest Coast as a bunch of plants in the region from the saxifrage family that all look fairly similar, but it's a helpful tool for distinguishing those leaves by silhouette, so that when the plants aren't in flower, you can still kind of tell them apart. Looking at flowers specifically, the botanical term is merosity, which refers to the number of parts, so numbers of petals, sepals, pistils, stamens. And then also looking at the entire plant, looking at color of each plant part, the hair, whether something is hairless or glabrous or hairy. And botanists have many different kinds of words for different kinds of hair. So it's helpful to understand what kind of hair to look for and where. And then shape and smell. Smell is kind of something that it's a characteristic I didn't expect to look for at first, but then you learn that some plants have distinct smells, and smell is not something you can photograph. So it's helpful to understand that if it is an important diagnostic characteristic before you make it out into the field. So here's an example of one digital tool that I really like for distinguishing lookalikes, and that is nwwildflowers.com. And this is a tool built by local Portland botanist Adam Schneider. He's a great guy. And it's one of my favorite tools for comparing lookalike species. And I find it can often be easier than navigating a dichotomous key, which is a tool we'll discuss in a moment. So you'll notice a few things here about species descriptions if you're not already familiar with them. The first is some very technical vocabulary. Um, in addition to species descriptions, I recommend finding a source you can use to understand what the technical botanical vocabulary means. Obviously, you can Google each of these words, but I also highly recommend the glossaries in the Flora of Oregon and the glossary in the Flora of the Pacific Northwest as well. And then I'll also shout out this one recent publication that I just picked up. It's called a Manual for Plant Identification and Classification. This is a kind of a lab manual built for students, and so it makes a great introductory manual for amateurs like me. It has a detailed section on plant anatomy and a ton of really good illustrations that are all hand-drawn by the co-author and illustrator, Emma Fryer. And I find that illustrations are often sometimes more useful than photographs for kind of accentuating the exact characteristics you're talking about. Yeah, and the name of that, again, I'll write it in the chat here when I have a moment, is A Manual for Plant Identification and Classification. So in addition to that technical vocabulary, you'll also notice some very specific measurements, and some of them are quite small. And for that reason, I recommend you bring both a ruler with you and a hand lens with at least 10 times magnification. So the ruler will help you where measurements matter. You can even take photos with the ruler next to certain plant parts if you're not keying things out in the field and you want a photo with that reference in it. And then the hand lens will help you when you're looking at very small plant characters, things like hairs on the undersides of leaves or flowers, things like that. So I mentioned dichotomous keys earlier. If you're a professional botanist, dichotomous keys are kind of the gold standard for distinguishing species within genera. But even if you're a beginner, it's a good tool to start to learn. Not all dichotomous keys are difficult to use. Some of them, there are dichotomous keys in regional flora, like the flora of the Pacific Northwest and flora of Oregon that can be quite technical. So here on the right, we have an example of a dichotomous key for iris species in Oregon from volume 1 of Flora of Oregon. But they can also be slightly less technical. So this is a more specialized key just for one subsection of the iris genus in the Pacific Northwest from the Society for Pacific Coast Native Iris. And here you can see like this is more measurement based and there's less technical vocabulary because it's been designed by people who are flower enthusiasts, but not necessarily professional botanists. And it can sometimes be helpful for certain genera to just Google and see if there's a key that someone has made for it that might be a little more approachable, a little less technical than some of the stuff you'll find in your thick, heavy books. And then lastly for this section is phenology. So phenology is the study of the timing and cyclical patterns of events in the natural world. So for plants, and phenology is generally used to refer to plants, that means things like when does the plant leaf out? When does it flower? When does it bud? When does it fruit? And that's important because you want to know when to go looking for your target plant. I think most of us here are probably trying to capture plants in flower. There are some plants you might also want to capture in fruit, things like sedges or milk vetches, things that are sometimes easier to identify when fruit is present. But in any case, understanding the right time to go to find what you're looking for when it's easy to identify is critical. And that's where tools like Oregon Flora and iNaturalist can come in handy. So here's an example either of some photographs from Oregon Flora. Any of the photographs on there, they have dates associated with them. So you can see the these photographs of Iris tenax when they were taken with the plants in bloom at the specific location where the photos were taken. And things are kind of changing a lot, like things have changed a lot in the last several decades with plant timing, and things can be off from one year to the next. But this will at least give you a rough idea of like what time of year to go, what month to go to look for things in flower or fruit. I also really like this phenology chart that exists on iNaturalist. So if you go to iNaturalist and look up a specific species and go to the info page for that species, there's a chart for when the plant is in flower and fruit. And so you can see there that bump in the chart is the number of observations each year by month with that flower when it's flowering or fruiting. And so you can see that bump in April, May, then kind of tapering off by June. So suggests April and May are good months to go look for Iris tenax in flower. And in addition to reviewing that chart, you can also look at individual observations on iNaturalist in a specific region. In the same way, you might go look at individual photographs on Oregon flora. And this allows you to narrow your phenological study to a specific geographical area when things like elevation or latitude might play a role. So we've kind of started to talk a little bit about figuring out where to look. I'm going to get into more detail into that in this section. So herbaria records, despite the proliferation of other digital tools, herbaria records, I think, are still the gold standard for figuring out where to locate a target plant. There are a ton of herbaria that are digitally accessible now and that have scanned their accessions so that they're viewable online. This is just a sampling of a few herbaria that are available online in the West Coast. If you want to, most of these herbaria are built on the Symbiota engine. So if you go to updates.symbiota.org/portals, you can see a complete list of herbaria worldwide that use their software to make their herbaria data digitally accessible. And there are a ton more, not just in the United States, but also globally, if you're watching this from somewhere else or doing some traveling. So I'm mostly going to be talking about Oregon flora in this presentation, like I already have been, but just know that there are a lot of other herbaria whose data are accessible online. So when I was initially planning this presentation, I had kind of taken a bunch of screenshots of Oregon flora. I was going to walk us through screenshots, but I figured it's probably actually more useful to see the tool in action so that you can see, what I'm clicking on and how I'm using things. So that's what I'm going to do here. So the tool I use most in Oregon flora is the mapping tool. So it'll start zoomed in to the state of Oregon. And from here, we can search individual plant families or genera or species, or we can also just start by drawing a polygon on a map and seeing what shows up. So for this example, I'm going to draw a polygon, this rectangle here, west of Mount Hood. And I'm not going to filter by any specific group of plants. I'm just going to leave everything else blank for now and just see what shows up and click search. And it'll often give you this warning. It'll say some search results for rare taxa are hidden. This is just because I'm not logged into Oregon flora with special privileges. Not very many people do have access to that data. And it's a good thing that exact location data for rare, threatened, and endangered plants are hidden to protect those species and those populations. So we can see here, just in this quadrangle alone, there are 1,683 data points. The circles in Oregon flora are herbarium accessions. So those are records with a physical sheet of an actual physical specimen that lives in a drawer somewhere in an herbarium. Oregon flora doesn't just have records from the OSU herbarium. It also includes records from PSU and I think some others as well. And then if it's a triangle, that means that record is just an observation. So that's a data point without a physical specimen. So that just basically means someone saw it there and that record made it into Oregon flora somehow. And those records are, it's nice they're there, but they're often not quite as useful as having an herbarium sheet in front of you. So in addition to drawing the polygon, we can further filter our results. So one genus I especially like is wild buckwheats or Eriogonum. I think we have some other wild buckwheat fans on here today. And here's an example. I just search by the genus Eriogonum, and I can see 3 records in here. Only one of them is an actual vouchered specimen. The other 2 are observations from the Mount Hood National Forest botanist. So they're both triangles. So we're going to start by looking at the vouchered specimen. Hang on while I make my screen sharing work with this new window. Okay. So knowing how to read the details on the page for a voucher specimen is really helpful. So we obviously have the name of the specimen we're looking at, who collected it, when they collected it. The verbatim date is just the date as it was originally written on the voucher. Sometimes people will use a slightly different format and they will preserve the exact data originally. The locality, so this is the locality as the collector recorded it on the voucher. A latitude and longitude with this plus or minus 2,000 meters refers to the level of geographical uncertainty of those coordinates. So it was within 2 kilometers of this point on the map. What elevation it was at, and the verbatim elevation, again, is just the elevation as it was written. Generally, they'll convert it into meters since, we're scientists, right? And scientists use the metric system. So it's also often helpful to look at the exact, this is a scan of the physical herbarium specimen. So sometimes data that is transcribed on the previous screen we were looking at might be slightly off. Like someone might have misunderstood what someone wrote as the locality, for this voucher, or they might have gotten the coordinates slightly wrong. And so looking at the scanned image of the voucher can be useful to correct those mistakes. So I recommend double checking if a scanned photo of the voucher is available. There have been times where I've seen mistakes and been confused, and then looking at the original source material kind of clarifies things. And that's especially true for older specimens where handwriting can be pretty difficult to read. So I'll pop back to the map view and we'll go back to playing with the map. Great. So in addition to this rectangle, I can draw, if I go here and use the delete tool to deselect a specific polygon, you can draw circles and search within a circle. Or you can also draw these arbitrary polygons where you might follow a river. So like this, like you just follow the course of the Sandy River roughly. And this is useful if you're trying to follow a specific land feature, like a river or a ridge or something like that. And you can search within an arbitrary polygon that you define instead of having to rely on a rectangle or a circle. And if you like, you can toggle between different map layers. So by default, it will load with the USGS topo map, but you can use satellite imagery, which can be helpful if you're trying to understand habitat. Um, various other layers are available here as well. And in addition to the mapping tool in Oregon Flora, I also really like the inventories feature. So inventories are essentially plant lists for specific places. So if you scroll down, when the authors of Flora of Oregon were putting together their first volume, they picked 50 choice spots and put together a plant list for those locations. Those are great. The Oregon Flora species lists, there are over 5,000 available here, cover a much broader range of areas. Some of these have been put together by the Native Plant Society of Oregon itself historically. And so you can just zoom in and click on a specific location. So like here's a plant list for, this is just off Highway 6 in the Coast Range. It looked like it was near Elk Mountain or Kings Mountain. And it'll load a list of all the taxa that are on that plant list. Okay, this is for Jones Creek Forest Camp Road, and look at it. It was put together by the Native Plant Society of Oregon. So you can download this as a Word document or a CSV, and you can also filter this list much in the same way you would filter the map by specific families or taxa. And this is really great for putting together a plant list. I use this all the time for the hikes that I lead. Just put together a plant list by family, and then I might take the Word document and add to it, use it kind of as a base. So I'm not having to start from scratch. So that's Oregon Flora, or that's what I'm going to cover in Oregon Flora. There's definitely more to play with, more to poke around with in that tool. And so I highly recommend spending some time in there exploring more of what the website has to offer. But for our purposes, that's good for now. So in addition to Oregon Flora, I also want to cover the mapping features available in iNaturalist. So like I said, I'm a huge fan of iNaturalist. I've been using it for roughly 4 years now. While herbarium vouchers are still, I think, the gold standard for planning a trip, iNaturalist is very useful as well, especially if you're looking for more recent data or if you need just a sheer abundance of data. So you can filter by individual kingdoms here. So it can filter by plantae or fungi. And you can also search by any level of any taxonomical level you want. So we were looking at wild buckwheats earlier. We can narrow things down and zoom into Mount Hood, look roughly at the west side of Mount Hood like we were earlier, and see a variety of observations that people have posted of buckwheat. So this is fun. This is an observation from roughly the area we were looking at that voucher from earlier. Looks like Eriogonum compositum to me. And we can see that this was observed in June of this year when it was flowering. So, roughly this location at this elevation, that's when you can expect to find the species flowering. In the same way, you can draw polygons on Oregon Flora. You can draw polygons on iNaturalist. Unfortunately, on iNaturalist, we are limited to circles and rectangles, and we can't freeform draw polygons. And then there are also a variety of other filters. So you can filter observations by like whether or not they have photos. Most observations do. or you can get into exact date ranges. So if we were looking, if we wanted to, we could just look at observations that were posted in the month of June this year. And it will automatically update. So we see a much smaller quantity of observations visible here. Alternatively, you can look for observations by month across years. So look at all observations for all Junes ever, and not just for June 2025. And this is especially useful when you're doing that phenology research about your target. Beyond the filters that are immediately visible, there are some advanced filters that may be interesting to you. If a nifty tool is you could, if you're like putting together a presentation like this, you can search by photo licensing to find observations with photos that are free use. You can also search to look for observations that have you've reviewed previously, or observations that belong to a specific place. If someone has added a polygon for a specific place on iNaturalist, you can search within those existing polygons instead of having to draw a rectangle that fits around a place that isn't quite rectangle shaped. So I could look up Mount Hood. Oh, there's a good one, Mount Hood Wilderness Area. So someone added the polygon for the Mount Hood Wilderness Area on here. So it's much more squiggly a line than I could draw with a circle or rectangle, and I can search in that. Or I could search for, see, I think Mount Hood National Forest as a whole is on here. Yeah, so much larger polygon. Not all national forests or state forests have polygons. It's up to users to add them individually, but this is a super useful tool that I use all the time. In addition to the filters that you see here, if you're getting really in the weeds, I also recommend familiarizing yourself with search URLs in iNaturalist. So search URLs, if we look at the URL for this search, we can see each filter we've applied is a parameter in the URL itself. So this and taxon ID equals 48939 refers to this genus, Eriogonum. Or if we look at, what was I looking at? Oh, iconic taxa plantae. That just refers to like this filter that we've selected here. And using search URLs, you can input parameters that are much more specific than the iNaturalist user interface allows you to. So you can search, for instance, by multiple places by using this ampersand place ID equals, and then a comma separated list of place IDs. Or something I also like to do is use annotations. So people can annotate their observations to indicate whether something was flowering or budding or fruiting. And you can use the term ID and term value ID parameters to look just for things with the flowers, things that have been tagged as flowering under the flowers and fruits annotation group. Not all observations are tagged. It takes extra work. Someone has to go do it manually. But some people do take the time to do that. And when they do, it makes it more useful for cases like this. So there's too much on this single page to cover here, but I included the URL in the presentation because I think that this is a very useful tool if you're getting more sophisticated about how you're navigating iNaturalist specifically. And then the third tool I want to cover for not necessarily looking for plants, more looking for plant habitat is my favorite digital mapping tool, CalTopo. So this is just a dedicated mapping app. It doesn't necessarily have it doesn't have data specific to plants. It just has a broad range of data. So we can see here, let me toggle to, you can choose from a variety of different layers. I'll start just with the map builder topo layer, but I can toggle between satellite imagery, different kinds of satellite imagery. So this is from the, I think this is, forget the NA, it's a National Agriculture Inventory Project or something. It's a federal project, or global imagery, which is a commercially available satellite imagery, I believe. Or you can toggle to view layers of like scanned Forest Service maps. If you're more familiar with, physical maps, you can just view, a scanned Forest Service map online. That's often useful for finding things like campgrounds or springs that might not be mapped on other layers. And a nifty thing I like to do is stack multiple layers on top of each other. So if you click stack base layer, you can, right now I have this map builder topo layer as the base layer, but then I can add the global imagery satellite layer and then gradually increase the opacity of the layer over the bottom one until I find this kind of happy medium. So I can still see the outlines of trails here, but I can also see, landforms and forests, and I can see the actual ground that I'm interested in exploring. So one tool that I learned about recently in CalTopo utilizing layers is the ability to add custom terrain shading. And this is a tool that could have saved me a lot of time over the years, but it essentially allows you to add a custom layer that shades terrain that meets certain criteria that you outline. So I can add a filter, for example, to filter and look just at stuff within a certain elevation range. So I'll just pick arbitrarily 3,200 and 6,600 feet. And then I pick this color and I click save. And then I can see shaded on the map for me all the terrain, if we give it a second to load here, all the terrain between in that elevation range. And I can choose to display or hide that just using this custom layer box or checkbox on the right. But you can also get even more sophisticated. So you can look at aspect. So I can look even just at northern aspect. I want to do something like this. Say I'm looking for a plant that likes shaded northern cliffs in a particular area because it's a lower temperature plant. It likes to hide from the sun. And then I can also even filter by slope. Let's say it like grows specifically on cliffs. So anything with 45-degree angle slope or higher. So I have multiple layer rules applied here all at once. Oh, and it looks like oh no, I didn't get too specific. So I can see the amount of red is a lot smaller, but I can see that the specific terrain that meets those criteria here highlighted in red. So that's between that specific elevation with a northern aspect and a slope of between 45 and 90 degrees. So I spent a lot of time over the years kind of like squinting, like, what does the slope look like on there? What's the elevation, and trying to kind of keep track of all these characteristics at once. And these custom layers are great for kind of scanning maps efficiently for interesting geography. Of course, you can also display things like slope angle shading and contours one at a time, if those are useful to you. There's also, I usually have this checked on. It's this public lands layer, so that anything that's public is color coded. So this green color, you can see this legend down here at the bottom is Forest Service. The red is either the Bureau of Land Management or the Bureau of Reclamation, and so on. So that's especially useful when, obviously Mountain National Forest isn't so much a checkerboard, but if you're somewhere like in the Coast Range where there is a checkerboard pattern of public lands and private lands, this is really useful for determining land ownership of the place you're trying to go. Fire history is also an excellent tool. They have polygons going back to they have pretty specific polygons going back to 2000, and then I think some rougher polygons going back to 1900. I'm not sure how reliable or complete the inventory of pre-2000 data is. Oh, okay, so if we scroll north, we can see here the Yakult burn from 1902 that burned the Silver Star Mountain area is reflected, but the boundary is probably a little less precise than some of the polygons for the more recent fires. But that's often relevant if you're trying to find a plant that grows after a fire in disturbed areas, or if you're just trying to avoid areas that have burned recently. Yeah, so I won't go through each one of these overlays, but you can imagine how they might be useful for identifying habitat for the plant you're looking for. And of course, there really is no substitute just for looking at satellite imagery, just raw satellite imagery, and scanning the landscape itself. So, I can see here there's talus slopes, there's some creeks here. And if you spend enough time looking at maps, you can even develop the skill of being able to distinguish like what trees you're looking at. So I can guess, like, I'm seeing a lot of conifers here. But when I zoom in, I can see there's maybe shrubs or hardwoods in this area. And some trees also have specific color patterns. Noble fir is a big one that's easy to see stands of the blue-green needles of noble fir on satellite imagery specifically. And I'm sure there are others that I just haven't learned yet as well. So those are the few tools I use the most, but there's some other great tools that you can use for locating habitat as well. And those include Oregon Wild has a great map library where they put together custom maps. Definitely recommend checking that out. They have like a great map of old growth throughout Oregon, for example. That's very useful. Or other kind of ecological maps that have data that those prior sources that we explored don't. Soil Web is a great tool for examining soil types. Not everywhere in the US has been mapped for soil, but a lot of places have. So it's kind of more remote, like National Forest. There's kind of no point in going in, taking soil samples, trying to understand, because people probably aren't going to be farming on the slopes of Mount Hood. But that's great when you're looking at plants that have specific soil associations. I can think of a few plants that are associated with even just specific soil subtypes, so it's helpful for those taxa. The Dogami geology map. So Dogami is the Oregon or Department of Oregon Geology and Mineral Industries. So it's like the state geology agency. Has a great geology map breaking down the geology of the region. And they also have a LiDAR viewer. So, we were looking at slope shading and slope angles earlier on CalTopo. The LiDAR viewer is essentially, it's like a 3D scan of the bare earth of the state of Oregon. So you can get a much more detailed view of slopes and cliffs and things like that. That's especially useful for when when you're trying to avoid falling off of a cliff or having to climb up something, but two, if you're looking at plants that grow on cliffs or grow on slopes, that's also a useful tool. And then I also included Google on here, kind of a sleeper tool a bit, but it's something I use a ton. Even just Googling like the species and then Oregon is for a specific county. So you might Google like Ariagonum, Hood River County. or Clackamas County, and turn up some interesting plant lists from government agencies. There are a lot of plant lists out there for places like research natural areas or areas of critical environmental concern, areas that like the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management has studied to some extent, that are available as PDFs on the internet. They're essentially scanned PDFs of reports that people put together, often back when the area was first designated or kind of later on as like management decisions were being made about the area. And those are kind of getting slightly harder to find as the current administration takes a lot of government resources offline. But I still recommend looking because a lot of them are still up. Okay, so that's habitat. Next, I want to talk about how to actually get to the, once you find a place that's interesting to you, and that, maybe has your target plant, mapping routes and actually getting there. Okay, so back to CalTopo. So CalTopo is useful not just for mapping habitat, but also for actual navigation. So they have you can see here the road layers here on the topo map that map roads as well as trails. So the trails are these dotted red lines. The dotted black line, it's usually an unpaved road, like a forest road. And then the solid black lines are paved roads, like a highway or a paved forest road. They also have a layer for the motor vehicle use maps. So a motor vehicle use map, if you're not already familiar, is a list of roads and the allowed usages of those roads in a specific on a specific public land. So like there's a motor vehicle use map you can go look up for all of different districts of the Mount Hood National Forest. Those layers are also visible on CalTopo. So you can view a key here. If you zoom out enough, you can kind of see the information. So this is, or if you zoom in too, so we can see here this National Forest road is for highway only. So that's a good indication that the road is, we know the road is paved. It's also in good shape enough that they exclude ATVs from this road, ATVs or other quads. Whereas this road is highway only 4-wheel drive. So that is a dirt road where 4-wheel drive is recommended. And it gets a lot more granular than that. Motor vehicle use maps are primarily, in my experience, a tool used by people who are doing off-roading, because they want to make sure that they're taking their off-road vehicles only on roads where they're actually allowed to use them. But it's also useful for making sure you can actually get to the place you're trying to go and that you're not going to hit a road that's only for off-road vehicles when you're in your passenger sedan or something like that. And then for drawing or for finding routes specifically, you can use there's a route drawing tool in CalTopo that allows you can draw a line. And then it will highlight all these different road segments. You can use this for mapping both hiking routes and driving routes. And if you click on a segment, it'll start the line along that segment, and then it will snap to lines that you follow along with your cursor. So it has like the ability to do route finding here as well. So you can just you can pick somewhere, like pick a spot on a highway and then pick where you're trying to go, and it'll draw a route if a route between the 2 points exists for you without you having to think about it. And then when you do that, I'll as an example draw something that doesn't quite make sense. I'll start on a road and end on a trail. You can hit the check mark icon in the left here, and it will tell you both the distance of the line you've drawn and the elevation gain of the line you've drawn, which is useful for planning hikes in particular if you're trying to plan a hike that's only so long and only has so much elevation gain, trying to guarantee how accessible it is. So that's CalTopo for route finding. Another tool that I don't use as often as CalTopo, but I find useful for some specialized cases is a platform called Onyx. Or Onyx. Onyx has several different versions of their app that they offer. So there's like Onyx Backcountry, which is more hiking and skiing and like sport oriented. Then there's Onyx Hunt and Onyx Off-Road, which are kind of more oriented toward those purposes. So I primarily use Onyx Backcountry. And they have a free version of the app with some features available, and then also paid versions of the app. I should say CalTopo does too. Like everything we were looking at just now on CalTopo was free, but there are some more advanced features that you can pay money to access. One tool that I rely on heavily in Onyx, and I'm logged in my paid account right now, is ownership. They have actual parcel ownership data in the tool. So you can zoom in and see who owns a specific parcel of land. So this parcel is owned by Chimicum Ridge LLC. And this tool is primarily useful when you are navigating those checkerboard ONC lands. So places like in the Coast Range, where state forests or national forests are checkerboarded with land owned by logging companies. And that's useful because different logging companies have different rules about public access. And so it's important if you're trying to go somewhere and you might be driving or hiking through land owned by a timber company to look up what their rules are to make sure you're actually allowed to be there. And they might also have information of like whether or not the roads are gated or things like that as well. One thing I hoped Onyx would do that it doesn't have a complete inventory of, and that nobody seems to have a complete inventory of, is gates. So gates on private roads, especially on timberland. Onyx does have some gates mapped. So if you zoom in, you'll sometimes see a little icon for a gate on a specific road. But there are some very well-known gates on both public and private land that just aren't anywhere on any of the mapping tools that I've used. So for that reason, I recommend that you prepare multiple potential routes to access wherever it is you're trying to go in case you run into a gate that you can't get past. And also be prepared to get out and walk if you have to. There have been a few times where I've been shut out by a gate just a few miles away from my target location, and I've just gotten out and walked to the place it is I'm trying to go. Some other great tools for wayfinding that I won't get into detail on include OregonHikers.org. So that's maintained by Trail Keepers of Oregon. They have both a forum where people can post trip reports and ask questions, and a field guide, which is like a wiki with maps with a bunch of predefined routes that people have written about with directions and data about the kind of things you can expect to see on those hikes. Those are great. There's a ton of excellent information on that website. And even for hikes that are like really obscure, routes that are obscure or kind of becoming forgotten, a lot of great information on the TKO website there. And then similarly for Washington, the Washington Trails Association has WTA.org, which has both trip reports and guides, and a map. And WTA also has a Trailblazer app, which is a dedicated app that they build and maintain, which is similar to some of the commercially available hiking apps like All Trails, but it's all with WTA data. So that's also a resource I recommend if you're hiking in Washington. All Trails is probably the most popular app for hiking, but it also has data for things like mountain biking and other kinds of activities you might be doing out in the woods. It's free, but there are premium features like downloading routes that you can pay extra money for. Gaia GPS is a tool very similar to CalTopo that some people swear by. It has very similar functionality to CalTopo. I think it's built and maintained now by Outside Magazine. So it's kind of more oriented toward outdoors people, which is nice. But my personal preference is still just to use CalTopo, which also has a mobile app you can download. Avenza Maps is not so much a map app as a map store. So we were talking about like motor vehicle use maps earlier for the Mount Hood National Forest. The National Forest makes available motor vehicle use map PDFs that you can download onto Avenza Maps and view there for free. You don't have to purchase the Avenza Maps app, and you don't have to purchase the motor vehicle use maps. And those PDFs are then geo-referenced so that when you're out there in the field, the PDF will show you where on the map you are located. And that's pretty nifty. So a lot of the maps on Avenza, I think, are geo-referenced, which is a pretty nice feature. But many of the maps on Avenza are not free. So like I said, it's more of a map store where you have to pay money for specific maps in the same way you would buy a paper map of some wilderness area. And then Watch Duty. Watch Duty is a nonprofit app that monitors current fire activity. So it's not so much a tool for finding a route as it is a tool for avoiding certain routes and getting the place you're trying to go safely. I highly recommend it. It's free, maintained by a great nonprofit team, and it's very useful in the day and age we live in, where we have to worry about fire season every year. So some rules of thumb I've developed for wayfinding are always bring a copy of your map, whether it's downloaded on your phone or physical. So don't rely on having cell service to be able to access your map. Some of the apps we covered will allow you to download maps for free. Sometimes it's a paid feature, like on CalTopo, it's a paid feature. But Google Maps, for example, has a free feature where you can download maps. Like I mentioned earlier, with regard to gates, plan multiple access routes wherever possible. Go through the effort to actually mark your routes on your map, so drawing lines that you can follow and reference later, so you make sure you understand which way it is you're trying to take to get there specifically, so you don't find yourself out in the field wondering, oh, which turn was it I was going to take. I think this next one will kind of be familiar for many of us, even if we don't spend a lot of time in the backcountry, but never rely solely on Google Maps for directions on the backcountry. Always check directions it gives you through other sources. I've had Google Maps try to take me down roads that haven't been roads for 40 years and are well on their way to becoming forest. That's pretty frustrating. So it can also put you in some kind of unsafe situations, making you drive up rutted dirt roads that aren't really safe for your vehicle. So yeah, double check before relying on Google Maps. Check with relevant agencies for road closures and conditions. This is important in fire season, but also post-fire. There are a lot of trails in the Columbia River Gorge that are still closed. And so I always recommend going to check with the ranger's office for the relevant National Forest District before you plan to go somewhere, to make sure you're not trying to take a road that's closed for construction or closed because of a landslide or something like that. Yeah, know the road and your limits. This is kind of just about avoiding terrain that your vehicle can't handle. We talked a bit about ownership boundaries already. Travel safely, just kind of general rule of thumb, let someone know where you're going, bring the 10 essentials, things like that. And then practice leave no trace principles. So one of the more fun parts about going places that are off the beaten trail is literally leaving the trail and bushwhacking. But if you do that, you want to practice leave no trace principles and minimize your impact as much as possible. And then finally, I just wanted to offer a few thoughts on how to share what you find thoughtfully. So when you're out somewhere new, where people don't, spend a lot of time, there isn't really trail infrastructure, pretty areas that see low level of impact from hikers or other botanists. I think it's important to be very careful about the kind of information you share about that location. So in order to preserve it for the future, both for the plant and for other people to enjoy. So these are kind of just a few rules of thumb that I try to follow. The first is to be very careful about sharing exact location data for rare, threatened, and endangered plants or other plants that are poached from the wild. So things like orchids, people unfortunately will still try to dig up orchids for their home garden, even though they have very complex relationships with mycelial networks that mean they will never grow there. So if you're posting a photo of an orchid to iNaturalist, you probably want to obscure the location or hide the location entirely so that you aren't giving it away to an ignorant poacher, something like that. And then if you do want to obscure the exact location of something you see, it's important to make sure you apply the same level of obscurity to all of the things that you share for that day. Otherwise, people can infer like, oh, Kieran was in this location on June 26th. And I can see that he posted these 10 observations in this exact spot. And then he had one observation whose location was obscured. I wonder where that observation with the obscured location was from. You can it's not too hard to infer. So for that reason, it's important to apply the same level of obscurity to everything you saw that day in that area. And then I don't think that this will be news to anyone in this specific presentation, but to take extra care when sharing location information on platforms where virality is a factor. I think we're all familiar with the impact that having a place blow up on Instagram or TikTok can have in the places we care about. And that is only more important if the place you're sharing doesn't have any or doesn't have robust trail infrastructure. We don't want those places to get overrun and trampled and destroyed. So, you can post your picture, and maybe say you took it somewhere in the Mount Hood National Forest, but don't say which specific ridge top or something like that. And that's it. I can take questions now. I don't think I saw too many come in the chat. I definitely saw some good tips though that I'll take a second to read. So just kind of starting in chronological order. I think, yeah, Paul had a great resource, Paul Slichter, for botanical terms, which is a plant identification terminology and illustrated glossary by James G. Harris and Melinda Wolf Harris. And Paul says that there's a drawing for each term, which is very, very helpful when you're trying to distinguish some of those phrases that are very similar. Justin mentions that CalTopo makes it easy to print digital maps on paper, so you can take them outside with cell service. That's a great point. So even if you don't pay for their premium feature that allows you to download map layers onto your phone, you can print a map out and take it with you. And then Jess Jess says, I'd add social media to your online research list. I like to follow hikers and botanists in places I'm interested in. And when I see them post photos from recent hikes, I'll often reach out to them to ask questions, which they're generally happy to answer. That's a great point. There are a lot of cool people on Instagram you can follow who post great photos. Also, great Facebook groups. I'm not a big user of Facebook, but I know there are a ton of great Facebook groups out there where people also share this kind of information.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Kieran, for that super informative presentation. Like a lot of us got a lot out of it, and just like Gregory is saying, I downloaded apps while you were giving the presentation.
Yeah,